Welcome back to another Wednesday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm your Wednesday host, Yeka, and this week we are talking about religious intolerance, both from those outside of the pagan community towards pagans and from within the pagan community towards those with different ideas or practices than their own. So our question comes from Al, or AL, I'm not sure which, who has a multi-part question. It's in the description if you're interested in reading the whole thing. But basically they ask what our personal experiences have been with that and for some advice on how to handle being in a space where people are actively hostile towards their beliefs. So I'm going to share my personal experience with that and then go ahead and get into some actual techniques that one can practice to help address some of these issues. So in terms of experiencing religious intolerance, I think that I've been quite blessed that I have not, at least consciously, experienced quite much intolerance towards me from outside of the pagan community, others looking at me. And we have on other weeks talked about religious privilege, and I think that that has, of course, impacted my life. But as someone who was raised as a pagan, I have always understood that my approach is somewhat different from the majority of the people around me, although I did have a community of other like-minded family members and family friends around me. But I have very seldomly been in a position where it's been an issue. And in my adult life, I have, just as a personality wise, I think, you know what, I have got a very, very short period of time that I get to be me. And I am pretty picky about what that experience is going to be and where I put my energy with that. And so if there are people who I believe are going to behave or have shown to me that they will behave in a way that is intolerant, then those aren't the people that I'm going to spend my time, my precious short time, putting my energy into. And usually I just don't engage with any sort of hate or anything coming from them. I don't worry about it. The only times that it is really an issue is if those particular beliefs of theirs are informing actions which are causing harm. And at that point, then I am bothered by different beliefs if they are trying to change me or impact me. Where I have experienced religious intolerance on a very regular basis, actually, and this shocked me, is actually from within the pagan community. And not everybody, of course. There's a select, very vocal group. But interestingly, as I mentioned, growing up pagan, I don't remember ever experiencing it until I joined this channel. And not from the fellow hosts and not from the majority of viewers, but almost every single time I make a video in which I mention that I don't believe in gods, that I'm a non-theist, I'll get almost every time at least one comment that is kind of nasty about it. That's this kind of gatekeeping stuff where this vocal group of theists who are, I suppose, threatened by the idea that there might be a non-theist that say you can't be a pagan. Pagans have to be this one specific way. And obviously I don't agree with that. So, and I'm not bothered by people having different opinions, right? That does not bother me. The way in which people express those opinions, that is the thing that bothers me. If they do it in a mean or abusive way, or they want to sort of focus on tearing someone down or insisting on their rightness and your wrongness. So, again, as I mentioned, I don't think that it's the majority of pagans who behave that way, but there are people in every group who are convinced of their rightness. And those people can often be the most vocal people. My guess with these particular individuals who like to make comments about this is that many of them may come from a background of a different initial religious background that they still have a lot of pain from, that there's still some anger from it, and the becoming a pagan for them has been empowering, but in a way in which they feel like it's a way of feeling superior. And when somebody has a different take on that, it can be threatening to them that their identity and their rightness is being threatened. And so I think that's why there have been so many lashing out kind of comments. But obviously, I don't particularly agree with them, and most of the time I don't engage very much. We welcome different opinions on this channel. What we don't welcome is abuse. So if somebody does name calling or that sort of thing, then that's not part of a constructive conversation. But let's see. So that has been my opinion. I mean, my experience, and most of the time, I just don't engage with those folks. But it does encourage me to keep making videos because I think, hey, it might be important for other people to be exposed to some of the less vocal perspectives. If there's a large contingency out there that is, or a vocal contingency rather, that is insisting that their way is the only way, it might be helpful for folks to see that there are other ways. So, in terms of techniques for how to deal with being on the receiving end of this kind of hostility, or being in a space where you know that you're not going to be, that your particular views and practices are not going to be welcomed, and and people may treat you as not welcome because they disagree with your practices. The techniques that I'd like to share, we've talked about a lot on this channel before, but the first one, which I think is just so central and key, is grounding, is developing a grounding practice that can be done maybe before entering a situation in which you know that there might be this sort of interaction, but also being able to ground in the moment and really developing that. I do have a video on my personal pagan channel about doing that. I will go ahead and link to that up here and in the description, so if that's helpful. But the next step that I think I was kind of alluding to before is really choosing and picking your battles and deciding, is this battle worth my time? Right? Is it worth it to me to engage with this person? And sometimes it's going to be, and sometimes it's not. Or engage with this whole community. And to really examine why. Right? So if the answer is, yeah, I want to have this fight. Look at, okay, well, what's the source of that? Is that I want to have this fight because I believe that it's important to educate people around this? Or is it, yes, because my ego was hurt and, I want to prove my rightness? Now, for me, I have pretty clear idea about which one of those I would want to engage or not, but I'm not here to judge you on that. So if you come up with a different answer, that's your answer. But just to be aware of that in yourself, of what the source is, because that can then guide you in how do you want to respond. So sometimes we don't, and this is certainly the case for me sometimes, often, I don't respond in the moment the way that I would really like to, in the way that most aligns with my values. And in later reflection, I might go, that was not the way that I wanted to respond. So later, in a place of safety, of physical and emotional safety, maybe in a ritual space or something like that, I find role playing out in my head, right, the scenario again, and having that, envisioning that same situation that happened, and then instead of the response that I did have, letting that go, going, okay, I'm going to let that go and replace it with the response that I would have wanted instead. And practice that mentally in a ritual space, in a sacred space, if you do a circle or something like that, multiple times. Personally, I find the shower is a wonderful place to do this. And within my personal morals, it's very important to not envision causing harm, and to be very respectful about, is true and honest to what I think the other person's response would be. And that's, I think there's a lot of potency and power in that. And so practicing that over and over again. And then the next part is practice, so that when one is in a situation like that again, ground and try to practice to actually do what you practiced in your role playing with it, and not beat oneself up when it doesn't work. So those are sort of the techniques that I go through and invite you to consider and maybe practice if it's something that you're that might be useful for you. And I guess, yeah, the biggest point that I have in this is to really examine where you want to put your energy. And sometimes it will be worth having that fight. Sometimes the education is really important. Sometimes it is a family member or a loved one. Sometimes it is a time to stand up. And sometimes it's a time to let it go and to focus on something else that is way more important for you. And know that their opinion of you is not what matters most. Your experience of yourself, your experience in this world, is what really matters. And if they're messing with that, are they worth engaging with? So, as I mentioned before, for me, with with experiencing the kind of nasty comments that I get sometimes, the majority of the comments are fantastic, and I love reading and hearing and sharing with the majority of you guys. You guys are incredible, and that makes it so worth it. But sometimes the mean ones are also kind of encouraging, because it goes, oh, maybe I've got a purpose. Maybe there's some worth to doing this and to sharing, and maybe this video will mean something to somebody. And so that, that makes it worth it to me. It makes that fight worth it. So I'm going to wrap up, but actually I wanted to mention this was really perfect timing. Talking about non-theistic pagan approaches, there was a book that just came out, as in like yesterday. Is a fantastic, I have actually already read it. I don't have the physical copy with me right now to show to you, so I will go ahead and link that in the description. But it is a book about atheopaganism, or that's actually the title of it. And I think it is really, I invite all of you to check it out, those of you who are interested in earth-centered non-theistic approaches, but also those of you who aren't, just as a matter of education, to see that there is, this is one of many, I suppose you could call it a tradition, groups, practices, one branch of paganism that is part of the big pagan family. So if it's something that you don't have a lot of experience with, I really definitely invite you to check that out. So, longer video this week, but I think it was important to share. I really loved sharing that with you all. And if you have any practices that have been helpful for you or experiences with intolerance or that sort of thing, let us know in the comments. And I will see you next week for a pretty interesting and perhaps kind of charged topic. So until then, take care.